here to talk about the changing job market and the pandemic, and we have some great panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. We'll start with, on my screen, Sabra is right next to me. So Sabra, tell us about yourself, kind of your background, where you work now, and where you worked before that.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Sabra Thomas. I'm currently at EDP Renewables North America. I've been there since March 16th, so a little less than a couple months. I actually transitioned from a law firm to an in-house role. Before this, I was at Sidley Austin. I was there for a few years doing corporate and finance work, just on the transactional side. And I was a fifth-year associate and decided to make the switch to in-house. So I moved over to EDP Renewables a couple months ago.
Awesome, thank you. And Megan, will you tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got here?
I'm Megan Penrod. I'm a legal recruiter. I've been at Amicus Search Group for about 3 years. We are a Texas-based third-party legal recruiting boutique. Primarily, I work with law firms. So even though I live in Austin now, about 90% of what I do is in Houston, and I'm still actively involved with HYLA, which is a fantastic organization. So thanks so much for having me. So yeah, I will bring the legal recruiter perspective. It's been quite a shift for us. And so I'll share with you all what we're seeing.
Perfect, thank you. And then last but not least, Benjamin, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Ritz. Can you hear me okay first? And yes, excellent. I guess my short pitch is I study the court system so you don't have to. I've had the opportunity to serve either as an intern or as a clerk at a number of different courts in Texas and federal, as well as the Supreme Court of Ireland. And eventually I'd like to help people get them and their stuff off the planet, if I can. So my background obviously is I was a state and federal law clerk, and I went over to, once I left the Southern District of Texas, to go to a boutique law firm. And after being there for a while and having some good experiences, I was ready for my next challenge. So I was looking, I wasn't quite looking, I was slightly less experienced than our other panelists. So I was looking in a slightly different bracket, but close to the 5-year mark, just not quite. So the 3 to 5 year mark.
Okay, so Megan, we're gonna talk to you about the job market here in a little bit, but I want to just kind of highlight. So Sabra, you said you started your new role March 16th, so that's like about a week or so or less after the stay-at-home orders came down. I can't remember the exact date, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And then Ben, just so that I'm clear, did you recently start a new role, and at what time did that happen, and were you kind of interviewing?
Yes, so I had been interviewing prior to the start of the orders. And continue to do so during the stay-at-home period. And I started my new job on the 14th of April.
Okay, perfect. And so just to give everybody context of where everybody's at and where they came from. So Megan, I know that there's been just kind of all sorts of differences that you all are probably dealing with, including changes in who's looking to hire and also who's needing. So the first thing that I would love for you to address is just the differences in kind of the firm's hiring process that you've seen. Any shifts that they've done and kind of their process for how they're looking for people and what people they're looking for, and then what they do after that.
Yeah, so generally when firms are hiring, you see opportunistic hires or strategic hires. Opportunistic hires are, of course, those hires of excellent candidates that they may or may not have an active need for, but they're excited about, willing to take a look at, willing to onboard. That's almost completely stopped at this point. We are focused only on strategic hires, and even those strategic hires have significantly declined. Firms are doing what they can to work within the personnel that they already have to staff cases without making additional hires right now. everyone was sort of anticipating a recession, but the COVID situation has completely, I mean, for most of March, shut down the hiring process. To the extent that hiring has been going on, a lot of that has either been delayed, or in the few cases that it has continued to move forward, that's all transitioned online, as I'm sure Sabra and Benjamin can attest to.
So you kind of touched on this already of the differences in firm needs, but I'm wondering, and I'm speaking from the perspective of a labor and employment attorney, and at our firm we have a pretty robust bankruptcy practice. So are you seeing an uptick in certain areas where certain types of attorneys are being sought out more than others?
We are, for sure. And you just touched on two of those areas. Bankruptcy is probably the biggest uptick. We started seeing some bankruptcy hiring last year in anticipation of a downturn that was coming. So some firms are pretty well staffed up, others are trying to catch up. And so we have started to see, even this week, I saw 2 new bankruptcy postings in Dallas. But that is one practice area that is busy, getting busier, will stay busy for a while. Labor and employment, your practice area is another one. COVID is presenting a number of novel issues that law firms are really busy trying to grapple with. And a lot of those right now are coming in the labor and employment space. You know, what do you do with workers that are at home? What do you do with their data and privacy that comes out of that, which also often falls under labor and employment? Another practice area that we're seeing a huge boost in is insurance, coverage disputes. There are all sorts of claims that are arising out of COVID. Business claims about interruption of business, force majeure. There's a whole lot of insurance hiring that's going to be happening. In terms of what we're seeing less of, mergers and acquisitions, all the transactional corporate stuff is way, way down.
That really jives with what I was going to ask, because, you know, we all get these emails from time to time from, you know, your firm included, with marketing and telling us about job positions all over. And for me, and it's not just been labor and employment focused, I've had quite a few emails about just litigation roles, maybe not as many as before, but at least from my perspective, it seems like it had not slowed down as much, but I understand that's one perspective. And so, you know, is there any reason you can think of that we're still seeing some recruiting type emails out there? I mean, is there still, you know, at least for litigation, is it just because I'm shielded, you know, from the downtick in the other areas?
You're in one of those practice areas that crosses over, you know, into litigation as well as some counseling work. And so, and, you know, all of the recruiters are probably working on the same stuff right now. And so those people in those practice areas are probably seeing even more recruiting emails because, you know, from our end, we're trying to anticipate what's happening. Even though we haven't seen an uptick in litigation quite yet, that's largely due to the courts being closed. We're anticipating, however, that this summer, going into the fall and into the next year or two, litigation is going to be a really hot practice area. It had been down a little bit compared to transactional work for the last few years in Houston in particular. But anytime there's a recession, people sue one another. And so litigation is one of those practice areas that surges during a downturn. And so in preparation for that, I'm personally reaching out to litigators I know, have worked with in the past, or want to reach out to in the future because I see potential in what we know is going to be coming.
Sure. And I'm sure, you know, in looking for firms, you'd probably tell people, you know, whether you're there now or thinking to move, that, you know, finding a practice that's got a nice balance is always a good idea, so that when you've got the hot and hopping, you know, transactional practice, you've got stability there, and then in the downturns, you've got kind of the litigation to fall back on. So perfect. So and Sabra and Ben are going to go a lot more into this topic, but we are curious to hear your point of view on kind of the differences that you've seen in the interviewing process, and then if you've actually positioned anyone into a new role, the onboarding process.
Yeah, we have, we've been fortunate to have some interviews that have been going forward in the last month or so. And so I've had the opportunity to counsel candidates, associates, and partners on how to prepare for, you know, an interview, which is a really personal thing over a video conference. And you deal with technology and the lags and dial-up and backgrounds and kids and pets. And, you know, everyone has been pretty understanding on both ends that there are probably going to be some hiccups. There are a few systems that are frequently used. One is Blue Jeans. You all might have heard of. A lot of law firms use that for video conferencing on a regular basis.
What was that again? Sorry, I haven't.
It's called Blue Jeans. WebEx is another. I've even heard of Google Hangouts being used to set up some of these meetings. And so we tell candidates to prepare to speak a little bit more slowly, prepare to log on ahead of time, test their connections. We always have a phone number as a backup in case something goes awry. But then there's also some tips and tricks on, you know, the best way to present yourself in a video conference. You know, you, at least from the waist up, dress professionally, you know, try to avoid distracting or, you know, a lot of personal items in the background to keep the conversation as focused and professional as possible.
And that makes sense. And attire, would you address, you know, you should, of course, come dressed.
You're going to court.
It feels like something you shouldn't have to say, right? But then we hear these stories about people who go to court and are laying in bed under the covers in front of a judge. So sometimes you have to say what you think would be obvious. So that's really helpful. And of course, if you have stuff to add as we go through this, because you have been counseling people through, feel free to chime back in, Megan. But I'm going to switch over to Ben to talk a little bit about your interview process, because you've kind of been through, it sounds like you started interviewing for this new role kind of pre-pandemic a little bit, and then maybe saw a transition in how the interviews were being done as the stay-at-home orders came through and stuff. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of go through the, you know, background of what types of interviews you did, and then kind of highlight some of the differences for us on the types of interviews.
Okay. First, while there are different categories of firms, technically, I would say that for the most part, the interview process proceeded the same through most firms. Most firms would do a screening interview over the phone. Sometime, a lot of them would, especially the larger firms, followed by a in-person interview with 2 to 3 people. Sometimes with some of the boutique firms or mid-sized firms, they would have a lot of people that they would do in sequence, like they'd have more of a larger block of time, and we do a series of meeting a lot of different people that I might potentially work with. And then whereas other firms might bring me back, might do a group and then a different group. And that varied more by firm than really to any category. Once the staying at home was the thing to do, of course, we still had the first phone screening interviews. That was really no different. The ones following that mostly proceeded to be phone interviews. I did not have any video interviews with anyone, interestingly. All the people that I spoke with subsequently wanted to talk by phone. And that also included the final negotiations going back and forth once, you know, an offer was made, and that kind of thing was also done over phone and over email, because we're not meeting in person. Yeah. In fact, I was about to have an in-person meeting to discuss an offer with someone, and then one of the orders came down for the absolute stay-at-home, and we had to reschedule that.
So my question is, and this is more just asking for your opinion, and Megan, you may want to chime in on this too, because I think you probably have, you know, more of a whole picture here. But I know with my own experience within just my firm, at the very beginning of all this and working from home, some of the people who I worked with or dealt with, clients, were pretty resistant toward this type of technology, you know, Zoom. And even myself, I'm not a big fan of most things new when it comes to technology. And so I experienced some resistance in doing, you know, video type stuff. Whereas now the same people, and really truly after 1 or 2 times of doing it and saying, oh, this isn't so bad, I've seen the same people kind of changing their minds about it. So I don't know, Megan, if this is something that you've noticed, have you seen, you know, an initial resistance and then maybe people opening up to it, or are your clients all a little more sophisticated and jumped right in? And not to say the others aren't sophisticated, because it doesn't matter what firm you're at. Certain people don't want to do things a certain way. They're not going to do it. But go ahead.
That's an interesting question. I've noticed that the firms that have active needs and are ready to move forward with people, they were happy to jump on board and do what they felt they needed to do. Many of them started with a phone call, but then in lieu of in-person meetings, which is, it's almost unheard of to, unless you're completely moving across the country. Locally, you don't ever accept a job and start without having met the person. And to the credit of a lot of these hiring partners who are sometimes, a little bit older, a little bit more averse to adopting new technology, I really haven't seen as much of a resistance to it. And in fact, like you, Brenna, I've been hearing a lot of really positive things about it and looking to the future of, is this something that we continue to implement even after COVID? Is it more efficient for everyone?
Yeah, truly. And so that's kind of is a nice segue into our next topic of, and we'll go to Sabra on this and then Ben probably back to you about it, but kind of the, have you met the people you work with question, so Sabra, just to kind of remind everybody, you started working just right before all this happened. So I think you actually may have had a day or so in the office and you went through kind of the normal interview process. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So my interview process was normal because that happened before, anyone was contemplating all of this. So I did meet a few people. I had an initial screening interview over the phone, and then I met a few people on my team in person when I went in for my callback interview. But my first day was actually one day before my company instituted a mandatory work from home policy. So, and by that day, a lot of people in the company were already starting to work from home anyway, just as a precautionary measure. And my supervisor wanted me to come into the office that first day just to get set up with my computer and HR and everything like that. So I went into the office on my first day. It was me and him and a few other people in an office of hundreds. And like a lot of the lights were out. It was really strange. He gave me the tour anyway, just to show me kind of where all the different departments were. But it was mostly just dark and empty. But I got set up with my laptop, dealt with some IT issues, got to talk to a couple people in HR. And then we got the email that afternoon, just that we were going to be working from home for the next couple of weeks. So yeah, it was one day, and looking forward to going back in sometime soon.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, and I'm going to jump to Ben just real quick because I do kind of want to hear his perspective on, were you able to go in and meet anybody, and did you get equipment, right at the beginning? Was your experience the same as Sabra's, where you kind of came to an empty office and met one or two people? How did that go for you?
For the most part, yeah. So I came in briefly at a social distancing kind of thing with the HR person so they could get me set up on the laptop so that I could take it home. And although I did go back a different day to get a monitor to plug it into because it, better view. The following day, I actually did meet with all the partners in town in my section, as well as the head of my section, in a very large conference room. We were all very spread around, but we did kind of meet and go over all the cases in a broad brush. So I did come in twice, once to kind of get the technology and get that set up, and once to meet some people very briefly.
Okay, so that, Sabra, and I kind of will Ben ask you the same question, but what has your process been for receiving work? So I know you and I talked about this before this panel, kind of if you were having a lot of Zoom meetings and if you were meeting a lot of people that way. And I want to talk about that too, but as far as like directly with the people you work for, how are they assigning you work and how are you communicating with them?
Yeah, so my assignments are mostly funneled through my direct supervisor, which has been really nice. And he's been awesome just throughout this whole process. We mostly communicate via phone or email. And same with the other attorneys and other business people that I've been working with. Luckily, it's easy to just pick up the phone and call someone when you have a question. Zoom has been fairly limited. We've had some webcasts just for training purposes, but as far as just amongst my team, we did a Zoom happy hour on a Friday that was just kind of like a welcome happy hour for me and another attorney who started after me. But we haven't really been using it too much for work purposes. So yeah, it's been interesting, but luckily my supervisor has been able to kind of, clearly communicate assignments to me over the phone and email.
So that's good, because I think, there's two really important aspects, at least for me, in starting a new job. And it's number one, making sure that I understand what's expected of me and the work that I'm getting. Yeah. And number two, I want to try to connect with the people who I'm working with. And so it sounds like, at least with regard to knowing that you're getting work and you're feeling like you understand what's expected of you. And how do you feel about resources available to you? Do you feel like you're, left behind a little or struggling a little to catch up on how they do things because you're not in the building, or have you had any of those types of challenges?
I mean, yeah, I think so. It's just kind of the nature of it. I think my training has taken a little bit longer than it would have otherwise. I was able to do a lot of the typical training stuff in my first week, but other things, other tasks and programs that I haven't used before, normally my supervisor and I will be sitting 2 desks apart. And if something comes up, he can just walk over, I can walk over there. He can show me kind of how to do it. And I feel like that's all been a little bit drawn out just because of the nature of this situation. And so we've been doing training kind of as the need arises. If there's some program that I haven't used yet, but now I need to use it, we'll hop on the phone and he'll walk me through it. So I think that there is a little bit of a lag there. I know everyone's doing as best they can, and I'm not complaining, but I think I think being patient and flexible in all of this is important, just because things do tend to take maybe a little bit longer than they would if everyone was in the office.
I think that's really important to remember is the patience factor. And for everyone, whether you're the person who's brand new or the person so my legal assistant started like 3 weeks before all of this. And that's one reason I thought to ask the question, because I know she's been struggling with just catching up with our systems because she's not there and doesn't have someone right next to her. So my next question would be, do you feel like, and I know, you probably feel like you have to say yes regardless, but how is your company giving you patience and understanding and telling you, like, we know that this isn't normal, and if it takes you a little bit longer, it's okay? I mean, what are they doing to
Oh yeah, no, they've been really great about that. They've been constantly kind of just reassuring me that, like, this is a weird situation, and we're all trying to make the best of it. The company sends very regular updates on kind of how we're dealing with the pandemic, schedules for maybe going back into the office, which is probably not anytime soon, but just kind of keeping tabs on everyone and staying in pretty constant communication. The general counsel and my direct supervisor have both been kind of constantly sending that message as well. And so I have felt, very welcome. It's odd doing all of this from a distance, but I think they've been really good about trying to make me feel integrated into the team and letting me know that this is only temporary. Because, there is that normal kind of stress at the beginning of a job. You're trying to make a good first impression. It's really hard to do that remotely. You want to feel like you're integrated in the team. You don't want to feel like you're going to be overlooked for work because you're not fully integrated yet. So I think another thing that's important is just being proactive, and that's on me too, just reaching out constantly and saying, what can I help with? And just kind of reminding people that you're there and you're part of the team. But they've also been really good about that. I'm not just saying that.
No, but that's good. And that's really good advice that you do need to make sure. And I think that's true for even associates or attorneys who are, sitting in a job they've had for a year or 2 years or however long, make sure that people remember that you're there, because, a lot of work comes from just walking down the hall and people seeing you. So it's important, I think, for everyone. So Ben, I want to talk to you about the same thing, the kind of how you're receiving work. And I mean, you heard the topics that Saber just covered. I want to get kind of the firm perspective from you, and how that's been going and how the firm has talked to you about the pandemic. And are you getting the same types of updates, all that stuff. So spill it.
Yeah, no worries. And it's not too dissimilar in the broad strokes. I'll say that obviously there have been some technology hiccups, but a lot of the training, because it's a large enough firm, would have been done kind of on our computers anyway. So that hasn't changed. Obviously, you know, I can't just walk over to IT if I had a problem. If I had, we use certain headsets with Skype, and I had trouble setting that up initially. But IT got back to me. I sent them an email and said, hey, I'm having a problem with this. And, you know, an hour or two later, I got someone who could either remote into my computer or give me a call on my cell, and we fixed the problem. So I would say there's kind of probably a little bit more of a delay than if I was physically in the office, because I could just walk down to the appropriate hall or floor. And they have been patient about that aspect of, you know, hey, you know, sorry, this took me a little bit longer, or this technology aspect didn't work, or I couldn't upload it to this system, or something like that. Same with our legal assistants and paralegals also being patient with me learning the new system as well, because they, you know, I have to put it where they can see it, or do the things that they need to do with it too. And I met them via phone. I have not met them in person yet. In terms of work assignments, so I work for multiple partners within the same coverage group. As Megan mentioned, coverage is busy. There's plenty of work. I'm sure there's more work than I could eat. So getting work has not been a problem. I haven't had to be too proactive, because the first meeting was like, here's a whole bunch of stuff to get started with. Occasionally other things.
I want to echo that for anyone who's super worried. My experience too has been, I've had a lot, and it's not just employment work, but I don't mean to interrupt, Ben. I just want to say good. I'm glad to hear that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so they came, so they've been proactive with me about sending me stuff, in addition to the stuff that initially came up, like, you know, hey, we need to fix this, or a client just asked about that. Can you do this real quick? And so I'm sure eventually I would like to be proactive, but I haven't had the need. I've been getting my assignments primarily through email. It varies by person as to how they proceed afterwards. So some of them will be like, you know, hey, here's an email with the stuff, read this over at the time to chat on the phone. Some people purely procure email, and they're like, you know, here's an email, if you have any questions, respond. We go back and forth over email. Obviously, I don't know the person that well, so there is, you know, that kind of loss of information in terms of making sure that, you know, wanting to do a good job and being new on the job and wanting to impress them. But I seem to be getting good feedback, so I'm happy about that. But it is a little different, because normally, especially with several of them, I would probably just walk down the hall, but I can't. And it's also not always clear when it's okay to call. Thankfully, we have a system technologically. We use Skype for Business, and it will show, you can either do a tailored message, or you can have an existing message, and it can show whether you're away, or whether you're busy, or whether you're available to chat. So, or sometimes we take into sending someone a quick message in the same way that you might knock on someone's door or something like that to see if they're available as a substitute for that. And so we've started to figure out other ways to work around that issue that we probably wouldn't have needed before.
I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, is just, and it's something that I've experienced a little bit, and more so with other people I've talked to than for me personally at my firm, but kind of a blurring of boundaries that tends to happen when you're working from home nonstop. And I think it can go either way, but I do think it would be interesting, especially starting a new job where you haven't kind of already established who you are and been able to put up the same type of boundaries you maybe could put in before. And so I do think that that's probably a unique thing to figure out how to do if someone pushes the boundaries, to make sure you're not getting calls super late at night or super early in the morning or on the weekend, because people are working at odd hours right now. So it sounds like you both are working with employers who are being very respectful in general of what's going on. But one thing, Ben, has your firm been updating you or keeping you in the know about how they're dealing with the pandemic, and whether you guys are coming back to the office anytime soon, things like that?
Yes, yes, they have. I know I guess a couple of things on that. First, before I came onto the job, I did have a conversation with the section lead to say, make sure that, I wouldn't move and suddenly have to look for the work because, they didn't have enough work. So that was one concern. And they certainly have plenty of that. And then there have been some firm emails. I say that they're coming at it from a couple different perspectives. One is they're being more proactive on trying to get people to put their time in on a regular schedule. On a weekly basis, so that they can have a little bit less loss. Because if you don't put in your time like every week, then you might forget certain hours or something like that. So they're encouraging people to do that more regularly, so as not to lose time. Also, but they are keeping us aware of like what the plan is, what the firm is doing in order to compensate what for perceived long-term potential issues with it in terms of the recession or whatever. They're also sending us emails, getting us an idea of, when they think and how they think they will start phasing people into offices. And so they're discussing all of those things. And I'd say we get at least one email a week on that issue.
And that seems to be, that's what I've heard from other attorneys, at least here in Houston, is a lot of the firms seem to be on the same page as far as how often they're updating what they're saying. And I'm hearing a lot more of, we're going to see a phased in approach of back to work or back to the office. Most of us are still working. So I want to real quick, before we go back to Megan and talk about kind of what we see coming up in the market. Sabra, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to go back to it because I think this ability to connect with your new coworkers is so important. At least it is for me in the beginning of a new job. And, we've done Zoom happy hours with people I know and have met many times, and it's awkward, it's just like, okay, what are we talking about now? So I'm curious just to kind of hear how it's been. You mentioned that they had a welcome happy hour for you, and, tell us how that was, and do you see more of those types of events happening in the future, or you think it was one and done?
Sure. So I think it was a good idea. I could tell that everyone on the team who has worked with each other for, longer than a couple of months was excited to see everyone. And you can tell people are just kind of missing the office environment and the camaraderie. For me, it was maybe a little bit awkward just because I haven't met most of those people yet. So, it was good to, see faces and kind of put faces to names. So all in all, I think it was a good idea. And I do think that they will do more in the future. I've already started to get invitations for lunch meetings, and just our monthly legal meetings that we normally would have in person. I think they're going to try to start doing those via Zoom. And so I think we will see more of that. It's just maybe taken a little while to catch on, but it was good. I wore a normal shirt that I would normally wear to work on a weekday, and everyone else was just in t-shirts and caps and super casual, and I was way overdressed. But it was the first time that I was seeing most of these people, so I felt like I needed to do that, and I probably won't next time. But yeah, it was.
I think that's great, and I'll just cut in to say, I think from my perspective, until you meet people in person, I think that's really great advice. It's always better to be the best dressed in the room,
Yeah.
To the worst dressed or something. So I think that's my first mentor out of law school told me, even on jeans day, which I don't listen to this, on jeans day I wear jeans, but his philosophy was you don't even wear jeans on jeans day at work. So some people are very strict about these things, and then others, and depending on your firm, not so much. So smart, at least for the first one that way. Ben, have you guys done any type of Zoom or other platforms to have happy hours or any type of get-togethers at your firm?
No, we were planning one for when we get back. There have been some humorous check-in emails or things of that nature. So I can tell some people definitely have a sense of humor. So there have been some emails back and forth that have been, semi-work related, as I'd call them. But we have not had any happy hours of that nature. I've done some with organizations like HYLA, but not with my firm.
Sure. Okay, so Megan, and of course, if there's anything you want to comment that we've already discussed, definitely feel free. But I want you to just kind of talk to us about, and you kind of already addressed this, what type of positions we see coming up in the future. And so if there's anything you want to add to that from what you talked about before, but also any other challenges that recruiters are facing, whether it's attorneys being hesitant to leave their firm, even if maybe they were ready to go before, or everyone is laid off and everyone is looking. I mean, what types of issues are you dealing with?
Yeah, that's, there's multiple parts to all of that. I think broadly, everyone is a little on edge remembering what happened in 2008. Many of us were not practicing yet, and so didn't have to deal with the effects of that downturn directly. But many of the firms, the big AM law firms, laid off, dozens of attorneys. We're not seeing that happen, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. Primarily because they're not so overstaffed as they were in the years leading up to 2008. And so I think to anyone who's sitting here looking back, 12 years at what happened then, we're not expecting to see that. We are starting to see some layoffs, but they're usually, hit or miss in practice areas that are just not quite as busy, and firms are making calculated decisions to let certain people go. But we're not seeing a ton of that, some, but not a ton. In terms of people being hesitant to move firms, there's a little bit of that, but I'm also hearing more people who are willing to hear what's going on. Even if they are, even if they hadn't been interested in looking around prior to this, firms are doing a variety of different things with regard to associate compensation to get through the next year. And so somebody who had maybe been on the fence or had been considering a move is a little bit more willing to hear about what else is going on, which firms are looking for someone like them, especially if they just had their pay slashed. There's also, though, the counter side of that is the fear of the, first on, last, or last on, first off. That, phenomenon of, getting hired on and then immediately cut. I think the firms especially are being cognizant of that, and really, like I said, only hiring for strategic needs. And so any moves right now are to fill a very defined gap in a practice area where they know that they have the work. It's actually really reassuring to me to see firms being so conservative in this approach. And I think a lot of the salary slashing, a lot of the partner draw reductions are a result of what happened in 2008. And so they're gearing up for what will likely be, a relatively long recession. But they're doing those things now so that they don't have to make really rash decisions down the line. And so we're just we're playing it by ear, seeing, who is, needing what at any given time and trying to adapt, and I've learned more about bankruptcy practice in the last month and a half than, I probably ever have. And, it's one of those areas that, there's a gap of lawyers that do that kind of work at the level that's needed, because it just hasn't been a really hot practice area because the economy's been so good. And then all of a sudden there's some holes there. And so lawyers who have been potentially interested or want to pivot their practice area, these are the kind of practice areas that are going to be hot right now. It's a good time to, if you're considering making a switch to one of those practice areas anyway, it's a good time to do it.
And so that's perfect segue into this last kind of topic that I wanted to get into before Brooksy takes us into our question and answer. And that's just, we have some law school students here. And so we want to talk a little bit about any advice you have for them, just kind of keeping these things in mind, that there are going to be practice groups that are in much higher demand when they get out of law school than what they were, last year. So what advice can you give law school students and comfort, even if it's there for them?
Don't freak out. It's all going to be okay. The legal industry has withstood so many of these ups and downs. COVID is really unique to the extent that everyone is just paused. The courts don't shut down in a bad economy. Like this is all really new for everyone. And so it probably feels a little bit more extreme than it actually is because of the big pause that's taking place. You know, summer programs are affected. I was listening to a really interesting podcast interview with Skadden & Arps, hiring director out of New York, talking about what they're doing with their summer program. A lot of those have shifted online. And so the social element is a little bit different. The work distribution is a little bit different. And so to the extent that you can just kind of roll with it, you know, that will serve you well. You know, we still work with lawyers who finished law school in 2008 and they're now partners. And so everyone remembers, oh, you were the class of 2008. You know, it's a tougher year to be finishing. You know, it's not as easy as it was 3 years ago to come out of school and land a top AM law firm job. It just won't be as easy to do those things. And so the advice that I would have is to be open-minded to the opportunities that are available. You know, to the extent that insurance defense work might not have been your priority, you know, those are really, really busy practice areas right now. And, you know, I'm in the business of calling attorneys with 3 years of experience or so who have gotten really good litigation experience, for example, at an insurance defense firm, and moving them to an AM law firm who needs a litigator. So those opportunities will present themselves down the road. And so, you know, make as many contacts as you can and try and stay positive.
I think that's really important to note, and I was going to ask you for exactly that advice. What law students should do, you know, if there's no job available, if their dream job isn't there, or even their, you know, the 10th one down the road, or even a paying internship, which, you know, the legality of that's up in the air. But, you know, I think what I'm hearing from you is, and what I agree with, is take whatever opportunities are there. And, you know, back in 2008, I know people who didn't want to do litigation, but did it because that's the job that they were able to get. And then when the market got better, switched over to what they wanted to do. And so that sounds like that's exactly what you're saying. So does anybody want to add anything else before we go to the question and answer portion? Brooksy, take it away. So I think Brooksy's going to talk about the rules of how it works. I have no idea. So
We call them rules, but we might need a little more order than we would during an in-person panel followed by a Q&A. So for anyone who would prefer to submit a question anonymously, please feel free to do so to me via email. I'm the one who emailed you with the Zoom dial-in instructions earlier in the day. Apart from that, feel free to use the chat feature to let us know you'd like to jump in with a question, and we'll go in order of who volunteers. So take it away, guys.
I was just going to add, if we don't have any questions right away, and anybody here just wants to comment, if you've been through something similar to these panelists and you think you have something to add, I, for one, am just very curious about what everybody's experiences have been. So, you know, and if you have something that you think could open up a dialogue, I think that's welcome as well.
I mean, I can make one comment while we're waiting for questions that I don't think I addressed before, which is as we went into the stay-at-home orders and so forth, there were some firms that I was interviewing with that did put their hiring practice on hold, and they were transparent about that. But that was something that did happen as things went through the process. Not everyone, obviously.
Hi, I have a question. What would be advice from anybody about not only an attorney, but someone who's also in oil and gas, who is seeing not just a downturn, you know, in law jobs, but also in the oil and gas market, and who could experience a layoff within oil and gas?
So you know, speaking just from generally talking as an employment attorney to a lot of people who've been facing layoffs and dealing with, you know, the uncertainty there is, you know, even people who never saw themselves collecting unemployment and doing those types of things, I think it's really important to remember that the unemployment benefits that are available for people who get laid off are really robust right now. There's a lot And that's not a long-term solution, I know, but it's something to keep in mind and focus on in the short term. But, you know, I think this is a good opportunity for anyone to also look at what other opportunities are out there, be flexible in what type of opportunities you pursue. If you've ever thought about going into business on your own, you know, and it sounds cheesy, but this is a good time because it's being forced upon you, but it's a good time to examine, you know, what is it that I've been doing? What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? And when I come out of this, do I want to do anything different? But also just in a changing world, I think it's a good time to look at, you know, what opportunities are out there, you know, whether it's investment opportunities, if you're able to do that. But other than that, just like putting your time and energy into figuring out developing jobs that weren't there before and trying to stay on top of the changing world. So those are very vague answers and they don't give a lot of security, but I think it's important to try to remember that, you know, you can look at this as a transition period if that's something you're interested in. And I'm interested in what anybody else has to add, obviously.
From my perspective, I would add that echo what you said, of course, but also note that obviously, if you can, if you're concerned about a layoff, it of course, you know, you want to save some money just in case as well. But I would look at areas that are adjacent or upcoming that allows your skill set to be transferable. So on a subject, there are two ways to look at that. One is kind of a skills based, and one is kind of a subject matter based. On the skills base is like, what are the, you know, lawyer type activities that I'm doing on a daily basis? Are you spending more of your time, say, writing contracts, or are you doing more of your time drafting briefs? You know, I don't know precisely which area you work in oil and gas, but the point being is that you look at those skills and then you look at what other things that are transferable to as core skills. The second thing you can do subject matter wise, as Megan mentioned earlier, there are certain areas which are looking for people. Such, you know, I mean, you could jump all the way to healthcare, which would be unusual, but bankruptcy, companies that are, it may be a little bit early, but there probably are companies already related to the oil and gas downturn that are exploring restructuring, which is adjacent to bankruptcy. So you could bring your expertise for the industry into the bankruptcy practice. Same thing, similar, there are lots of coverage claims and other related insurance claims that are being made as a result of this on companies that are involved in the oil and gas area. And because you have that subject matter expertise, you would be an asset to those firms, and you'd still be working kind of around the kind of stuff, just not doing it in the same way. And there are probably other areas beyond that you could think of. So you could repurpose your either skill set or your knowledge base into a different area of law that is busy right now.
And something else that I would add is that, so I was primarily doing oil and gas transactional work at my law firm before I moved over to EDPR, and now I'm doing renewable energy. I did have some renewable energy experience at CLE, but I was doing a lot of oil and gas financing. And I think just kind of taking that and translating it into this new position is definitely something that's doable. You know, renewable jobs are on the rise. I know my company has a couple of legal postings up right now. So just wanted to give a little bit, you know, that's my experience. I've transitioned from doing a lot of oil and gas work into doing renewable energy. And so just wanted to add that.
All right, we've got a couple of questions via email. One is primarily for you, Megan. Do you have any advice on tailoring your resume if you're looking to switch practice areas?
Yeah, so what I generally recommend for a resume is a single page. Highlight either if you've got really great grades and school is relatively recent, put that at the very top with all your honors and whatever. Or if you've worked at a great law firm and that stands out maybe more than your school, start with that. But keep it to a page, and then have a second sheet where you highlight any deal work you've done or perhaps litigation matters you've worked on if you're a litigator. You know, and all you can really do on your resume is highlight the experience you do have. And it's the cover letter that really gears the conversation if you're hoping to switch practice areas. And, you know, that is where I do this on behalf of candidates frequently, where, you know, you're looking at a candidate who Let's say they've only done oil and gas work and they want to switch into, renewables work. You talk about the parts of that that are transferable. But it's a little harder to do that in the resume. The cover letter is a little bit better for that.
All right, good to know. And another question is for recently licensed attorneys. Many of the job postings are for experienced attorneys. Are firms looking for new attorneys? And other than online resources like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, or other websites, where can job openings for new attorneys be found?
So my thoughts on that, most of the law firms or even the regional boutiques have summer programs where they already have their incoming class selected. A lot of the first year attorneys they're picked out during law school. And so many of those slots are filled. And so it's hard coming straight out of school. I experienced this myself. I moved to Houston from St. Louis and then Washington, DC, was not licensed in Texas and didn't have a job lined up, and kind of learned the hard way that OCI and summer associate programs are really the foot in the door for many firms. If you're wanting to work at a law firm, look outside the AmLaw 100 and 200. Martindale online has a really good list of those. There are a lot of pop-up boutiques that have attorneys from either major law firms or they've kind of hung their own shingle for a long time but have excellent reputations that don't have the resources to have a full-blown summer program. And at the risk of being bold, reach out to the hiring partners, reach out to the managing partners of the firm, reach out to the partner that you want to work for. And instead of outright asking for a job, share your resume, share your story, keep it brief. I would generally say ask them to have coffee with you. But in this case, you might want to see if they'd be available for a phone call. And you're not going to get a yes from everyone, but there will be some that will take an interest and be willing to have that conversation with you. And that's probably the best way, to reach out to firms that are maybe looking for someone straight out of school. With recruiters, they're always looking for someone who's got a couple of years experience under their belt. But I'm all too familiar with the problem of needing experience to get experience. Another place to look, I had a law professor who called it regulatory flight time. I was actually a health law student, and so this rings true in many industries, but particularly in health law, where you work for an agency and you get some governmental work, and then a couple of years of that experience really helps you translate into a law firm, into private practice. I have a number of students I went to school with who are now, they're 6-year attorneys who did a few years of regulatory work.
Good to know. Another question that has been submitted is geared toward judicial law clerks who will be finishing their term in August. Should they start applying now or give it a few more weeks until there may be more certainty with the market?
I'm dealing with this problem right now with some of my judicial law clerks. Our consensus, internally that we've discussed at my company has been to give it a few weeks. Some of those start dates are being pushed out a little bit anyway. It's really still a little premature. In a normal market, it would just be the very beginning of the time to start doing that. In this market, I would hold off a little bit. As Texas especially starts to reopen, I think we'll have a lot more clarity. And, judicial law clerks are so highly coveted by law firms, that there's always a market for people with federal judicial clerkships. And often those clerks are treated as a second year. And if you're coming straight out of school and you're not sure what to do, consider maybe applying for a clerkship.
All right. Any other questions from our participants today? Okay, and while we've been talking, someone recommended the Houston Bar Association 100 Club as a resource of smaller law firms that people may not know about because they don't have summer programs. So feel free to take a look for that list if you're feeling burnout on ideas of where to turn, it might be a all-in-one resource to give you a few more doors to knock on.
I can add to the search thing, I guess. Google actually will aggregate a lot of the different search engines now. If you do a search in Google for, say, like attorney jobs in Houston, a little bluish window will pop up beneath your screen. And then if you click into that, you can search within. It takes you, if you click the individual job entry, it'll take you to Indeed or Monster or wherever it happens to be listed. But it's one way of having to search in less places. So that's a thing that I kind of stumbled across because it's not something they've been pushing or advertising that heavily, is another place to search. And usajobs.gov, which has been mentioned for the government jobs, that's where you go for that. I will say that if you just search for attorney, it won't find it. You need to think like you're searching for an article for a legal research project. Sometimes the positions are listed as counselor. Sometimes the positions are listed with names you wouldn't think of, but that are actually attorney jobs or attorney adjacent jobs, where they call them, I think, like JD enhanced jobs that basically require either a legal education or, say, like an accounting education or something similar, that aren't going to use the term attorney. So you might have to be creative in trying to find those jobs in usajobs.gov. That's something I learned when I was just out of curiosity. I mean, I stayed in the private sector, but I was just curious.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you especially to our panelists. I know that all of our panelists are happy to answer more questions if you guys have them. Feel free to email Brooksy with any other questions you have, or reach out to our panelists if you can find them, which should be relatively easy. I'm sure Megan is happy to help people who are looking to transition roles. And then just so everyone knows, we have this great sponsor who's going to actually sponsor an in-person event for us, when we were going to have it at a bar with drinking and good times. And we hope to do that sometime in the very near future. But because we love her, she's wonderful, she helped us out. I wanted to mention Cheryl Lamb at Cadence Bank. If anyone's looking to buy a house right now, or refinance your house, or in any way looking to get a new mortgage, or know someone who is, Cheryl is great. She's wonderful. She's a huge supporter of HYLA. She works with attorneys all the time, and I can get you her contact information. So feel free to reach out to me to do that, or find Cheryl Lamb online. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Good luck. Stay healthy, all that good stuff.
Yeah, as a reminder, this is approved for CLE credit. So if you did not provide the necessary information with your name and your bar number when you registered for the event, feel free to reply back to my email with the dial-in instructions, and we'll get you taken care of.
Thanks, guys. Y'all did great.
Thank you, everybody. Normally they like to get a picture, but nobody had their cameras on, so I'm not sure. We could take a picture of our panelists if you all want to, but there's, other than Will R., who I don't think is there. I just want to smile. I will do this little screenshot thing.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
I think I'm not sure that I know what I'm doing, so let me try one other thing. You guys can bear with me as you learn how